All things considered, a pretty wild weekend for the BYU football program and BYU basketball program. What does it involve? Well, a top-rated quarterback committing elsewhere. Mark Pope being in the headlines for a potential replacement for Coach Cal at Kentucky. Keanu Dawes commits to Utah. Coach Kahil Fennell heads to UT RGV. We got a lot to talk about. Not a lot of time to talk about it on a Monday.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who are everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where, of course, the motto is your team every day. And as such, this is your original daily podcast focused on all things BYU sports. And a big thank you for checking us out. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn wants to help you guys out when it comes to hiring for your business. It can be like a high-stakes wager no matter when you're doing this. That's why LinkedIn Jobs help you find the right people for your team faster. And more importantly, they're doing it for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, let's talk some BYU football right out of the chute today. And let's talk about Grady Adamson. Now, he was a guy out of Oklahoma that BYU is very high on, was looking like he was one of their top targets in terms of quarterback prospects for the 2025 recruiting class. He committed elsewhere over the weekend, deciding to commit to Georgia Tech. Yes, he's going to be a Yellow Jacket, apparently. He'll be joining Georgia Tech down there in Atlanta. And frankly, a biggest surprise, I think, for most involved. In talking with people around the BYU football program, they were frankly floored that he picked Georgia Tech. It's not that they weren't necessarily floored that he didn't pick BYU, but there was some thought that BYU was in the lead for his services. Now, a guy committing in April, does that really affect that much of BYU's game plan quarterback-wise, as they will have up until at least December with the early signing window to find another option or options at the quarterback position? No, it's not a death knell. This is not like this commitment came out of the blue in mid-December when BYU had Adamson all locked up, signed, sealed, and delivered, and he just frankly stunned everybody. But it does set BYU football back because Adamson was one of the guys BYU is very, very keen on adding to their quarterback depth chart next year. Does that mean, like I said, is it going to absolutely cripple BYU? No, but it is a bad look. So I'll acknowledge the simple fact that it's a bad look for BYU, as they have been losing out on a number of quarterbacks in recent memory. It's kind of insane to me, in my mind, this is just me speaking, that BYU, after putting two guys into the NFL draft in the last 3 years, I guess I should say, with Zach Wilson and Jaron Hall both being drafted, and then this past season with Keaton Slovis looking like he at minimum is going to get a training camp invite and very likely to be on a practice squad, if not a 53-man roster. The fact that the Cougars are having struggles finding guys to sign up to play quarterback for them after showing so much success in the quarterback department is stunning to me. What is going on here? What is BYU not doing that would sell it to these young men? Maybe there's a guy that BYU just hasn't discovered yet, and they will find him, and he ends up being the next great BYU quarterback. That very well could be the case, but the fact of the matter is, on paper right now, it appears that BYU is striking out a lot when it comes to quarterbacks they have targeted in the recruiting circles. Does that mean they need to rely on the transfer portal going forward, or maybe the junior college ranks, which is how BYU has added their last two quarterbacks that are contending for the starting job this year? Speaking of Jake Retzloff, who's a JUCO product, and then Gary Bohannon, who is a graduate transfer into the program. Even Trayson Bourget, who is clearly the number 3 quarterback coming out of spring camp, he's a transfer in from Western Michigan University. Now, he does have the one distinction of being a guy that BYU did target in high school before ultimately being passed over for other options, and then finding his way and the two parties meeting back together in Provo with him joining the BYU football program. But just alas, it does not look good for BYU right now. This is happening in April, so there is still time for the BYU football program to recover. It's time for Aaron Roderick, Matt Mitchell, Kalani Sitake, Fessy Sitake, whoever may have an influence on who BYU targets and or recruits at the quarterback position, well, now you got to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate who you're going after. There are a number of names out there. I could bore you with a breakdown of all of them. I'm going to hold off on that until I get a better sense of who BYU ultimately is looking at. But there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt, based on the conversations I had with people connected to the BYU football program, that it's a gut punch to lose a guy like Grady Adamson, because BYU had been recruiting him very heavily. He had made multiple unofficial visits to BYU in the past few months, and it really seemed like he and BYU were on the up and up, and it felt like it was a match that was meant to be. Well, Georgia Tech came in and apparently swept him off his feet, and the Yellow Jackets are the beneficiary of this. The other thing is that could Grady Adamson renege on that commitment to Georgia Tech and pick BYU? Sure, but here's the simple fact of the matter. When it comes to recruiting, when a guy picks another program, by and large, the program or programs that are jilted, they're going to move on. They're going to find other options out there. And if you try and circle back and say, hey, remember me? Are you still interested in having me back? It can be a little bit of a hard sell for programs to rekindle what they once had with certain prospects. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm venturing a guess right now that Aaron Roderick, BYU, they're all going to move on now and try and find the next best option for them. The good news is, like I said, if you look at the 2025 recruiting class, there are still a number of names out there that BYU either A, has recruited in the past and has had contact with, or other names that are popping up as this spring cycle kind of plays out. Now, this upcoming month, it's probably 3 months, leading up to a training camp, is a lot of the summer camp stuff. So we're talking guys will be going through 7-on-7 camps on the high school side of things. A lot of guys will be going to summer camps, including BYU's, and showing what they're capable of. And BYU will have a very, very big opportunity to evaluate a number of guys and maybe find an option or two that they can fall in love with all over again. But it's not a good look on the recruiting trail right now for BYU to have what I think many presume was your top quarterback target commit elsewhere. It's a bad look, and it's one of those things. It's a little bit of a black eye for Aaron Roderick and the BYU football program. But the good news is there is time to recover. It's happening in April. Like I said, this is not happening in December or in January in the lead up to one of the signing days, which would have absolutely been crippling for BYU in that circumstance. The good news is it's happening early enough that I feel like BYU has the capability of recovering here. But let's also acknowledge that so far it's been a really tough road for BYU in the high school recruiting department. So maybe Noah Lugo's the truth. Maybe Enoch Watson, when he returns from his mission, he ends up being what I expect him to be, because I think he's an absolute stud, but he's going to be on the shelf for at least 2 seasons, having him head out to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So you've got to find one of those quote-unquote stopgaps here, and that is what is going to be very, very critical for BYU in this 2025 cycle, to find the right guy or guys to come in and compete for BYU as soon as next year. All right, coming up here in just a minute, we're going to talk some BYU basketball. There is a lot of news for it being the national championship tonight. BYU not involved in that, but there is a lot of news involving BYU basketball all the same. We'll dig into that next right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at LinkedIn. Now, LinkedIn is here for you guys when you're hiring for your business. You want to be able to find quality candidates that are the right for the role. It's as simple as that. You want to find the right people for the job. That's why you guys need to check out LinkedIn Jobs as a tool to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and, more importantly, for free. LinkedIn is not just another job board. It is a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, making it the best place to hire. It gives you access to professionals you wouldn't find anywhere else. And there's all of that while making the process easy and intuitive, and hiring is super easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours of their job posting on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing many, many hats, might not have the adequate time or resources to hire. That's where they want to help you guys out. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post that job for free. And a reminder that 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. So join today and use LinkedIn. Once again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege and post that job for free. Once again, terms and conditions apply. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you guys for tuning in. If you're watching Fox Sports ESPN on your TV all day and sick of all the streaming that seems to be going on from all the talking heads on those networks, why don't you guys make the switch over to Locked On Sports Today? Is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day with the biggest stories about all the streaming going on the other networks. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or also on the Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, big news in the world of college basketball, and it's not UConn versus Purdue tonight. Some of you may have seen it. I hope you all saw it. Coach Calipari, speaking of John Calipari from Kentucky, is headed to Arkansas. Let that settle in for a minute. Crazy, crazy story. Coach Cal, a guy that has been at Kentucky and signed that quote-unquote lifetime contract with the Wildcats. Apparently, he has got a decision, he made a decision to go elsewhere, and he's headed to Arkansas. It sounds like boosters that he's very close with at Arkansas open up the pocketbook to make him a very, very rich man. Once again, he was already very rich from his time at Kentucky. But this is a guy, remember, there was some talk after their first-round exit this year that they may want to fire Calipari at Kentucky, but his buyout was prohibitive, like $33 million. Well, he decided to beat the posse out of town, decided, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go be a Razorback. And imagine that going back, speaking when he goes back to Kentucky with Arkansas. Whew, going to be crazy scenes in there. But how does this involve BYU and how does it relate to BYU? Well, as many of you might be aware, and if you're not, Mark Pope is a former Kentucky Wildcat. Yes, a team captain on that 1996 national championship squad. Head coach was Rick Pitino in those days in Lexington. And Mark Pope, I would imagine, will probably put his name in the hat or throw his name in the ring in terms of being interested in the Kentucky job. And it's worth monitoring for that. But I'm expecting Kentucky is going to aim, frankly, much higher than what Coach Pope is right now in terms of his star power as a head coach. I'm not saying that Mark Pope is not a rising star in the college coaching ranks, because when you go out and finish 5th in the Big 12 this past season, when you were picked 13th in your debut, very impressive stuff from Mark Pope. But we're talking this Kentucky job is going to have the who's who of the college basketball and maybe even some NBA coaches who are interested in going to Kentucky. Kentucky is the bluest of the blue bloods in college basketball. I'm not saying that just because they wear blue. They are the consummate, like the number one basketball school out there. A lot of universities, BYU is one of them, are dominated by their college football program. Kentucky is the reverse. They are dominated by college basketball and knows a football program over there. And Mark Stoops has done an incredible job, but it is always overshadowed by Big Blue Nation being a basketball powerhouse. So what will it take for Mark Pope to get the job at Kentucky and leave BYU? Well, I think it's going to take maybe 15, 20 guys deciding not to sign with Kentucky and stick wherever they're at. I just think it's going to be that far down the list. But Mark Pope does have those connections to that university. Like I said, a team captain, a 2-year star for them, leading them to a national title in 96, and having Rick Pitino in your back pocket. I'm not sure how much influence Rick has anymore in Lexington. Obviously can help you out in that front. So it's worth monitoring, but do not anticipate Mark Pope leaving Provo for Kentucky anytime soon. But hey, crazier things have happened. And if that happens, we'll break it down. We'll do some breaking news and we'll do plenty of deep dive on what the next options are for BYU. But until then, it's worth monitoring. It's a big, big deal in the college basketball world to have Calipari leaving Kentucky of his own volition and heading to Arkansas. It's crazy to consider that. But hey, he decided he was better suited to go elsewhere, and now all eyes will be on Kentucky and who they are going to hire. And like we're talking, like tonight has a guy like Danny Hurley, who is potentially going to lead UConn to back-to-back national titles. I'm telling you, Kentucky will kick the tires on guys like that, and they have to work their way down the list. And it have be, I think, a fair number of people who would have to pass on the opportunity to replace Calipari in Lexington before Mark Pope got that call. But it's worth monitoring. Now, the good news for Mark Pope is talking about his star rising as a coach is he has created his first, I guess, official branch of his coaching tree. And what I mean by that is You probably saw it over the weekend. Kahil Fennell, BYU's defensive coordinator, one of his assistants this past season, has been hired by UT Rio Grande Valley down in Texas. Now, UT Rio Grande Valley is down in Brownsville, Texas. It is about as south as you can go in the so-called lower 48 of the United States of America. It is absolutely down. It is like, you think Houston's close to it? No, Houston's is hours away. San Antonio, I think, is closer to Brownsville. It is way, way out of the way. But regardless, congratulations are in order for Kahil Fennell getting his first opportunity as a head coach. This is a guy who has grinded for quite a while, working as an assistant at multiple levels. He has a stop at UT Permian Basin out in West Texas, so he has connections to the Lone Star State, getting his first opportunity to lead a college basketball program. I've got to think in his heart of hearts that Mark Pope is absolutely thrilled for Kahil to get his first shot as a coach, because the one thing is all these coaches are very, very up for their guys when in terms of getting jobs. They want them to see them go lateral. They want them to see them go up in terms of the vertical ability as a coach. So, for example, when Chris Burgess left BYU, he ended up becoming the associate head coach at the University of Utah. Now, there was a little bit of the extra motivation for a guy like Chris Burgess having played at Utah and that being his alma mater for him to go there. But Kahil Fennell is getting his first opportunity as a head coach, and Mark Pope, I think, has got to absolutely be thrilled. The good news about Kahil Fennell getting that job, additionally, is that it can show that BYU can get you to where you want to go. Speaking of wanting to be a head coach in the college basketball ranks, Mark Pope now can turn his attention out to finding a new assistant coach to replace Fennell on his staff and say, hey, the last guy who held this spot is now a head coach in the college basketball universe at the FBS level. So come get an opportunity to show what you're capable of and do it here at BYU. I would imagine that Mark Pope will pound the pavement. He'll be working every angle he's got to find the right option to replace Fennell, because Kahil was absolutely awesome with regards to the resurgence BYU's defense had this season. BYU doesn't finish 5th in the Big 12 conference this past year without what Coach Fennell was doing on the defensive end. Remember, they were shifting defenses all game long, it felt like, all season long, and it really helped key a defensive turnaround of a team that struggled mightily their final year in the West Coast Conference. Obviously, they had their lulls, they had their issues on defense, but that's more about, I think, the overall athletic ability for BYU in terms of defensive structure versus what Kahil Fennell was doing in terms of morphing from zones to mans to matchup zones, 1-3-1s. They did everything, it felt like, on the defensive end of the court. So congratulations are in order to Kahil Fennell. We'll miss him at BYU. I think it was a very, very strong run for him in his short time in Provo. And it shows, once again, now that BYU can launch other guys in to the Division I head coaching ranks, and that will be a benefit to BYU trying to find a new coach to replace Fennell on his staff. Now, there was also an interesting tidbit from Robbie McCombs, and I will acknowledge I did not know this, is that with Kahil Fennell leaving, that obviously leaves an opening on BYU's bench as an assistant coach. They also have an additional opening on the staff that I did not know about. Apparently last year, because I remember they had allowed college basketball staffs to add an extra assistant, which was essentially bound to work on campus. They were not allowed to go off campus to recruit. So you had BYU staff of Nick Robinson, Cody Feger, and Kahil Fennell, who were out there recruiting on the road. They're going all over the country to these camps and these just visits and that type of stuff. But they also had Colin Terry, who was on BYU staff, who his recruiting responsibility was actually on campus. He was essentially homebound, I guess is the best way to term it, even though that's not a perfect analogy. But apparently there's one other additional slot there. So that could open up an extra opportunity for Mark Pope to fill out a full staff and adding 2 more assistant coaches. So it's worth monitoring in terms of the interest in Kentucky and Coach Pope in terms of that. But also it's awesome to see Kahil Fennell getting his opportunity at the next level and launching the first real major offshoot branch-wise of Mark Pope's own coaching tree. I think it's been pretty well reported. I can add this, that Rick Pitino's been very intent on kind of building his own coaching tree and having guys that he can point to that he helped launch their careers. And Mark Pope is absolutely one of the guys that Pitino will point to. And it'll be interesting to see if Rick Pitino could garner any interest for Mark Pope with regards to Kentucky. But it's awesome to see at the same time that Mark Pope is starting to build his own legacy as a guy who's helping other coaches get to the next level. And that's awesome to see. And congratulations are in order once again for Coach Pope, and more importantly for Kahil Fennell. And we'll be watching him from afar as he does what he does down there at UTRGV in Brownsville, Texas. All right. Let's finish out today's show with some notes on the transfer portal. A lot of stuff going on in that regard on college basketball. It is a crazy day of BYU basketball news, and we'll roll on with that coming up next right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you have not done so already, please consider signing up for our Locked On Cougars Insider group. It's a great way to interact with the show. What it is, you're able to text me directly. I can send out updates of what I'm hearing on BYU sports, insider tidbits, and the like when I'm out at BYU practices, passing along information in real time. And it literally comes to your phone in the form of a text message. You can shoot back questions, comments, whatever you've got via text messages. Well, click the link in the show notes below. We get a 14-day free trial. It's $5 a month. To remain as a subscriber as part of it, but it's been a really, really fun group. I've got a great group of people that we're interacting with on a daily basis here, and hope you guys will consider joining us as well. All right. So on the college basketball recruiting front, in terms of the other news we need to talk about today, we meant to get to the 1926 football season, but it doesn't look like we're going to get to that today. But on the basketball front, Keanu Dawes, a guy that BYU had interest in out of high school. He had entered the transfer portal after one season in an all AAC American Athletic Conference showing at Rice this past season into the transfer portal. Well, he is not going to be coming to Provo, but he will be 40 miles north as a member of the Utah basketball program. So I don't know really how much interest BYU had in terms of really digging in and trying to get Keanu to BYU, but it appears that he will be a University of Utah commit. So congratulations to him. The other one to keep an eye on here in the transfer portal is Brody Kozlowski. Now, the Corner Canyon product, his mom, Kristen, works for BYU. His dad played for BYU. His great uncle is some guy named Glenn Kozlowski, who's one of the greatest wide receivers in BYU football history that doesn't get his due for whatever reason. But regardless, his connections to the university run very, very deep. And Brody had committed to USC. Well, with the changes with Andy Enfield going to SMU, Brody Kozlowski, according to reports, has asked for a release from his national letter of intent with USC Trojans. Does that mean that BYU can get back into the mix? I would assume that BYU will absolutely pursue Brody, but he had a number of options last time, and the fact that he is back on the market, you can be guaranteed that there are going to be a number of other teams that are after him. I know that Robbie McCombs at Bankers Defoe mentioned that Nevada was a program that was very much in the mix. I think it really all depends on the Brody Kozlowski situation, is how what am I trying to say? How patient is he willing to be in terms of early playing time? Because as it stands right now, if Brody Kozlowski were to enroll at BYU, he'd be behind, I think, a guy like Noah Waterman, Fousseyni Traore, et cetera, on the front line. He is a 4, and he's not necessarily going to be able to play the 3 like I think BYU would like him to. Maybe they thought he could, but it looks like he's more of a 4, a power forward. For those of you using old school terminology for basketball, it's really becoming more positionless than anything else. I call him a 4, but his ability to shoot the basketball is unparalleled. This is a kid that when he is on, there are very few like him shooting it from 3, and he'd be a welcome addition to BYU in terms of that 3-point prowess while he develops the other aspects of his game in terms of his body, defense, and the like. But I think this is a kid, just reading between the lines, who wants to play a lot more than what BYU can offer early on in his college career. Is that a bad thing? No, because these guys are competitors. They want to play hoops. So if he decides to go elsewhere, great. But if he picks BYU, I think it'd be a very, very nice pickup because he's a 4-star prospect. You can never have too many 4-star guys playing for the BYU basketball program. So we'll see what happens on that front. Now, the interesting part also from Robbie McCombs reporting is that BYU is very much in on a guy that I would have absolutely loved the fact that they could land this guy, Andrej Stojakovic. Now, if that last name sounds familiar, his dad, Peja, is one of the all-time just 3-point specialists in NBA history. Many of you might recall his time with the Sacramento Kings in particular. Well, Andre, I think I'm pronouncing it correctly, he is a high-level 3-point shooter of his own. Spent this past season, his freshman year at Stanford, when Jared Haas was let go as the head coach at Stanford. He opted into the transfer portal and be a really, really, I think, nice pickup to bring Stojakovic to BYU, because Stojakovic is very much the guy that could step into that 6th man / 3-man role for BYU that Jackson Robinson vacates at BYU. I think a lot of people are saying it. I've already said it myself. I would plan on life without Jackson Robinson moving forward. If you think that he's coming back, great. I just don't anticipate it myself because it just doesn't seem like he is content to keep playing college basketball. He is a guy that's probably going to get NBA opportunities, and for good reason. He's got the length, the size. He showed the scoring prowess at points this season of being an absolute NBA type guy. And I think he's more than content going and developing in the NBA versus spending another year in college because he's played a lot of college basketball. He transferred twice in his 5 years maybe. He was in college hoops. So I think you can anticipate that Jackson Robinson is moving on. And if Andrej Stojakovic wants to play at BYU, that's a very nice like for like, just in terms of replacement for Jackson Robinson. Andre's got the length. He's got the 3-point shooting. He may not have the overall prowess that Jackson Robinson had as a 22-year-old in terms of Andrej is only 18 years old, but this is a kid, speaking of Stojakovic, who absolutely can get after it and fill it up when he's on. So we'll see what happens. It sounds like there are positive signs for BYU in the transfer portal. Also, Otega Oweh, who is from Oklahoma, who is more of a ball handling type guard that I think BYU would do well to bring in as well. Also apparently has been contacted by BYU. He's a physical guy. I think could be more of that. I don't know, the compliment for Dallin Hall. He's a 6'4", I think, 6'5", average 11.4 points, 3.8 rebounds, 1.5 steals on 49% shooting from the floor. You can do a lot worse than that in terms of bringing him in as a compliment at the point guard position alongside Dallin Hall if the Stojakovic situation doesn't work out. And we'll see. It'll be interesting to see because as it stands still, BYU only has the one open scholarship. Could somebody be pushed out and maybe asked to go to non-scholarship status? That could be a possibility, but as it stands currently, as of Monday, April 8th, BYU has the one open scholarship, and we'll see how they ultimately decide to fill it. But if you ask me my wish list, I think Stojakovic should absolutely be my first pick because 6'7", averaging 7.8 points, 3.4 rebounds, so not great numbers overall. 41% shooting from the floor, 33% from three, and also he had a season high of 20 points in a win over USC and 16 points in an upset win versus Arizona. So Stojakovic is not feasting on lesser competition. He actually played against some of the better teams in the Pac-12 and had some very, very bright moments. So it'll be interesting. It's a very interesting time for this. It is a dead period until the 11th in terms of visits for BYU and the rest of college basketball, but it does not mean that the college basketball news is not absolutely rolling right now out there in the ether. All right, that's going to do it. A big thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast. As always, we will come back tomorrow. We'll get back into our 100-season look back for BYU football. We'll talk about 1926 and kind of an ignominious mark for BYU in that 1926 season against their arch rival Utah that we'll talk about on tomorrow's show. So big thank you, as always, for your support of the podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen today. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers with us here as well. And until tomorrow, my friends, have a great rest of your Monday. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.